All right. Thank you, Rafi and Kamal, for joining me here today on Vonvo.com. My name is Max Ringelheim. I'm the founder of Vonvo.com. Um, Thank you for joining me here on Sunday, December 30th. I just need to go over two quick things before we get the video and the discussion started. The first thing that I wanted to inform you is that this video is being recorded, and once the discussion is over, we'll be uploading the video to the internet and posting it to our Vonvo YouTube channel. Do you both give me permission to do that?
Is there money involved in this?
No, there's no money. We don't make any money off of it.
Okay, because I want my rights.
Yeah, no. Right now we're just
permission.
Right now we're just doing it for content purposes. Rafi,
I got a kid coming along, and she deserves her inheritance.
No problem. Rafi, is it all good with you too?
Yeah, I'm fine.
Okay. And then
I wasn't expecting that.
Okay, and then the second item that I just wanted to bring up is that obviously when it comes to Vonvo, we have a few rules that we're trying to promote here. We don't want there to be any personal attacks, no insults or racist remarks.
Your mama!
no belittling, and we want to keep the conversation civil. Are you both good with that?
Sure enough is.
Yeah, that'll work.
All right, great. So let's jump and let's get the conversation going.
You know what? I can tell from your studio, this is a serious money operation. I think you're not honest with us.
Yeah, my serious money operation is that's where I just woke up 10 minutes ago.
That's what I'm saying. I think
that's Okay. So let's jump right into the conversation, guys. First, Rafi, you've been on the program a few times. So why don't you start with just giving a quick background of yourself, and then Kamal, since it's your first time on the program, why don't you'll give a background of yourself to everyone watching as well.
Okay.
All right, Rafi, you want to start?
Sounds good. My name is Rafi Gazel. I live in Jerusalem, Israel. I've been living here for about 6 years. I came from the United States. I used to live in Chicago. I'm an Orthodox Jew, and I'd like to see peace in Israel and Palestine somehow. And that's how I met Kamal in this project called the Best Plans for Israel and Palestine. We each wrote a plan. I wrote a plan for a confederation, and he wrote a plan for a federation. And we're pretty much on the same page, I think. We'd like to see people here get along and have better freedoms and have it somehow more like the United States, and still give each group some kind of, representation that they feel they need in this circumstance here.
Great. And Kamal, how about yourself?
I'm a lawyer. I live in Washington, D.C. My family is from Ein Kerem in Jerusalem. When they left Ein Kerem, they went to a couple of places. They went to Ramallah first, and then lived in Bethlehem before they left and moved to New Orleans. I went to law school and went to Washington, D.C. After I moved to Washington, D.C., I started getting involved with the media. I became a regular contributor or a person who would be sought after for comments on CNN, Fox News, Al Jazeera, all the major media stations on major events. I started an organization about 7 years ago which focused on the idea of terrorism. I was obviously opposed to it, but I wanted Muslims themselves to be the ones who were the hawks against it. I believe no matter what the problems were that Muslims felt they had around the world, no matter how they felt they were persecuted, I thought responding with violence was the bad approach, and I just wanted to stand against it. But my real love was always finding a solution for the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. And as Rafi said, I teamed up with a few people a few years ago, and we received some funding, and we did several conferences in Israel, Palestine. And the idea is, obviously I support something like a shared future, living together. I'm opposed to separation, not because I'm opposed to it, because I don't think it will work, But rather than just focus on my opinion, we invited all people who think they have a solution, who have an approach, to come present it in front of an audience and let the audience respond to your solution. And hopefully you would evolve and improve your solution based on how people responded. And one of the things we did is we did the controversial move of actually going to a settlement, the Ariel Jewish settlement, to do one of our conferences, which was big in the media. And I'm hoping to do that more and more. And that's where I am here today with Rafi. I mean, our idea is that of a shared future as opposed to separation.
Great. And that I think that's what we're gonna try and maybe focus the conversation on today, because you both have that similarity, and you've worked together, so we can kind of hear a lot of what your planning and stuff has been together, and what shared ideas you guys have. I guess what I would then go into first, just like on top of the personal background, Kamal. Rafi's mentioned, you also have experience of, the perspective of wanting to return to Israel. Can you talk a little bit about, that?
Yeah. Well, first of all, like many Palestinians, when we leave our homes, we're not allowed to return, and I mean that's part of the cruelty of it. I mean, I live in Washington. I experience a rat race on a daily basis, and I don't want it. I genuinely enjoy living, whether either in Israel or Palestine. I really enjoy it, and I want to do it, and I don't even have the option. I can't even land at the airport, because they either will not let me in at Ben Gurion, or they force me to go to Jordan, and so then I have to go across to Jordan in a bus, and it averages about 6-7 hours, which should take about 10 minutes, and I have to sit there and convince them to let me in. Even though I was born there, I have to convince them to let me in. And it takes me hours to do that, and at most I can get is 3 months. But even more cruel than that, even more cruel, is that I married a wife a couple of years ago who was from Gilo, Israel, right? So you would think like any Jew who's born in Jerusalem is automatically an Israeli citizen. Not so for a Palestinian. A Palestinian has to constantly fight to keep their residency. When I married her, she, like most Palestinians in Jerusalem, she was fighting for her residency. But when it came time for us to move, she needed something to travel. Finally, after years with lawyers of trying to get some kind of residency permit, she was finally forced to get one from the PA, from the Palestinian Authority, to be able to travel. Well, the disadvantage of that, she can't go back home. So if we travel, she can go to the West Bank only. She can't go to Israel. If she wants to visit her family, she needs to apply for a permit from the military. She may get a day or two to go visit her family. So this is just part of the difficulty that we experience in trying to go home. We can't. We lose our right to return when we leave. And it just doesn't work. I mean, this causes hatred and everything else. Now, I don't particularly have that hatred. I think this is just part of the problem. And rather than be upset, I like to work with people like Rafi, and actually people who are on the right in Israel. I wish I can go and work with the people on the far right of the Israeli government, settlers, because I think the solution is found with them. They want to live in the West Bank. They think that's Judea and Samaria. And someone like me says, you know what? That's cool. I agree with you. I think you do have a right to live in Judea and Samaria. I think you do have a right to live in settlers. And I'm willing to fight for your right to live in the West Bank and Gaza. But you have to fight for my right to have equality in Israel-Palestine. And that's the whole general thing.
Right, and so just quickly, one thing I just want to clear up. So, your wife was born in Israel. Is she a Palestinian Jew, or is she just Jewish?
No,
she's
she's not Jewish.
She's not Jewish. Okay, but both of you were born in Israel. Both of you were born there.
My wife is born in Jerusalem. I was born in Bethlehem to a family from Jerusalem.
Okay, got it.
And that's one of us can. She can go back to the West Bank because before she left, she got a West Bank ID because that's the only way she can travel. She can't go back to Jerusalem.
What does she need to what does she need to what does she need to get back to Jerusalem, and what are they saying that you're without, that you can't get back into, that you can't even get into anywhere?
She can't get it at all now. But what she has to do, what we did, like for example, when I wanted to take her to my conferences, we had to go to a special like military base somewhere. I think it's called I don't know. It's somewhere between Bethlehem and Hebrew, where you go and apply for a permit to travel to Israel. And they say, what is the reason you want to go? She said, I want to go visit my family. So after a few days of waiting, we asked for a month because our trip was a month. They gave her 3 days. Yeah. They gave her 3 days to travel to Israel. And she had just left there a year ago.
Right. So it sounds like there are serious flaws in the system of recognizing just perfectly normal and regular original citizens of Israel, and their unfair treatment now when they're older and more grown up and trying to return to just visit family and stuff. There are serious flaws that that Israel is well,
non-Jews who are born in Jerusalem in particular. Now, Israel says Jerusalem is the capital of Israel. If it's the capital of Israel, so a Jew who is born in Israel is an automatic citizen of Israel because it's the capital of Israel. But a non-Jew who's born in Israel is not an automatic citizen of Israel. They get what they call an ID permit, just like a driver's license.
Right.
But it has so many restrictions. Let's say, for example, you can't afford to live in the city and you decide to go 2 blocks until you got a cheaper house in Beit Jala. You lose your right, and if Israel finds out about it, you lose your permit in Jerusalem. You can never go back, never. If a Jew wants to go live in the West Bank, in a settlement, there's no law. So then, and so what some of them will do, including some of my family, I have like 6, 7 family members from Jerusalem who applied for citizenship. You would think that Israel would be happy, I guess, about that because it would be hard for the PA to claim Jerusalem if the Palestinians are Israeli citizens in there. But even applying for citizenship, it's so difficult. I mean, one of the guys, my wife's uncle, he applied 13 years ago. And he's been going back and forth to court. So these little processes that are very easy for Jews are a nightmare for Palestinians.
Right. Okay, great. Rafi, in terms of what Kamal's saying, I mean, is this entirely true from what you're hearing and from what you've seen? And do you what do you know about this entire process? And then we could go into maybe some suggestions on some possible solutions to this this idea of identification and citizenship.
Sure. I mean, there's a unique situation in Jerusalem. In the internationally recognized state of Israel part, when you go west of Jerusalem and you go to the regular Israel, if you're born there, everyone who's there is a citizen, even all of the Arabs. But in Jerusalem, what they did is Israel annexed it according to their own laws, East Jerusalem, and they, in theory, they claim to have offered them citizenship to the Palestinians in the area they annexed. But in reality, I'm not sure how much of that really happened. And certainly these days, the offer is not consistently on the table necessarily. If you're an East Jerusalem Arab, it's hard. You have to apply for citizenship, and it's a project. And if you don't have citizenship but you live in Israel, you're in a strange situation. You're allowed to travel to Israel or the West Bank as long as you're a Jerusalem resident. Once you leave Jerusalem as a Palestinian, and the Palestinians, they can't go to the rest of regular Israel. They could just live in Jerusalem if they're not a citizen of Israel. Then, if they move from Jerusalem, they lose that status of the Jerusalem ID card, and then they're as screwed as the regular Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza, who are basically trapped in these, within the Palestinian state. They're allowed, and even there's a bank. They can't go to visit all the settlements. and they certainly can't come to Israel. Like, it's real problematic. What they need to do is make some kind of situation where it's normal. Like, if certainly like this.
Kamal, did he freeze?
The city Israelis should be able to live in Jerusalem. And if you're a Palestinian who lives in Jerusalem, you shouldn't lose that Jerusalem status from leaving. And I think they should allow them to reapply for citizenship since they've been living as part of Israel for this long, at least, And right. in the long run, there needs to be some kind of coordination between Israel, Palestine, and possibly even Jordan. Just that entire region. Refugees ran back to Jordan, from Jordan have come to here. I mean, it was basically the original mandate of Palestine was this big area where it was essentially like one group of people, and the Jews like moved in here, and then they kept trying to cut like a little tinier state so that they could have a majority in some area of it, and this wasn't really even accepted by the other side. So you have to go back and start from scratch and find a reasonable way for the Jewish immigrants who came here and all the native Arabs in this region to live together equitably and still find a way so that they can get some kind of representation that they're looking for. Like the Jews, a lot of them came here, because they were like refugees from either the Holocaust in Europe, or then all the Arab Jews came here from all the surrounding Muslim countries after tension from the Israel-Palestine conflict. And then there were like Ethiopians who came here, a military conflict in Ethiopia, and the Russian Jews who were under persecution under communism, and they couldn't practice Judaism openly. And like all these people came here as refugees, like hoping they would have this place that would represent them.
Right.
And here in Israel, Palestine, and Jordan, you have 10 million Arabs, and there's 6 million Jews. So like they've got to find a way to work it out,
So yeah, no.
Leaving.
Kamal, who do you think is to, blame for, these flaws in the system? And what I was going to ask you next is, what do you think is the reason why they are, making it so difficult, on individuals like your wife and yourself to just return to visit?
I don't wanna blame anybody, because you see, most people, most experts, so-called, on the Israel and Palestinian side, recently I watched the debate between Dershowitz in the United States and Noam Chomsky, and like all debates, they focus on blaming one side or the other. Dershowitz was talking about what the Palestinians did wrong, and Chomsky talks about what Israel did wrong. If you start with saying why you're right and the other side is wrong, that tells me you're not really interested in trying to find a solution.
Right.
I'm not really interested in that. The way I see it right now, I see you got two people who don't trust each other, and who at least think that the only way to solve this, or who have thought, is to separate. But separating hasn't been easy for them. So the question, if they can't separate, can they live together in a way that makes them feel secure? Now, Israel wants its Jewish state, and many in Israel at least, they believe that Israel is not the land that they occupied in 1948 or that became Israel in 1948. They also believe Israel includes all of the land that the Palestinians call Palestine, including the West Bank and Gaza. They call it Judea and Samaria, and they believe they should have a right to live there. And I could potentially be fine with that. Now, for the Palestinians, to them, Palestine is not just the West Bank and Gaza. It includes all of Israel. So I don't think we should be scared of that. I think we should just understand that if both sides have attachments to each other's land or each other, so maybe this land, the proper thing is not to divide it. Maybe it's just to keep it as a whole and figure out to live there without fear and without scaring the other side. I mean, ultimately, when Israel became a state and the Palestinians fought, It wasn't per se because they were opposed to a Jewish state, despite what Israelis say. They were always opposed to partition because they always thought this was a whole. This was one country that's indivisible. So then, if both sides want it, so here's the fear. We know that Israelis fear that, well, if we give Palestinians equality, if this became one country, then the Palestinians would at least be 50% of the population, and could this threaten us as a Jewish state? Could this cause threats to us if they're 50% of the government, or if they outnumber us when they become 55% of the government? And the Palestinians would say, well, can we trust the Israelis? They've been persecuting us for 50 years. How can we trust that they would give us equality? Right. We can come up with a solution where it's not based trust, where you don't have to trust. There are many models. Now, one of the models I came up with, and I'm not stuck on it because it can be anything. I said, look, we can have two states, but one country. Two states rather than two separate countries. You can have states like New York and New Jersey, which are sovereign. They have their own leader, their own parliament, but they're part of one country, which is the United States of America. In this case, it would be the United States of Israel, Palestine. This way, for those Jews who want this Jewish state, they can have the state Israel. The majority or overwhelming majority of the parliament will be Jews. The governor or president of that state will be Jewish. And next door, you have the Palestinian state with overwhelming majority of Palestinians. The president is Jewish. But then they're part of the same country. And we found a way to elect every 4 years a prime minister of the federation. And we create rules to contain each other's fears. So, for example, and I don't want to take from Rafi stuff, so maybe I'll cut it here now, and I'll wait until Rafi talks.
Let's talk about. Let's go directly. We'll go into some of your rules and ideas, more specific right after. Rafi, what are your thoughts on what Kamal had to say? And I'm just curious. The one thing that Kamal pointed out that I thought was interesting was the idea of both sides being scared of one another. So, do you agree with that? And then you can kind of take it from there.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like Israelis and Palestinians are very afraid of each other. It's pretty weird. Like even Muslims in America are scared of Jews. I once went to a mosque to visit some friends there, and little kids were running away from me. It was really bizarre, And both sides, Israeli Jews will teach their kids the Arabs are bad and because of all these wars and stuff. Don't go in the Arab neighborhoods. It's dangerous. It's sort of like black people in the United States or something, white people being afraid of black people. It's Palestinians aren't really black, though, so they sort of look like the Israelis anyways. You have to, tell by their accent who to be afraid of. But, and my wife was telling me this story, and she grew up, and there was, an Arab neighborhood right near her. Her parents told her, don't go in there, it's dangerous, and she's like, oh, this neighborhood looks cute, and, there's all this fear propaganda, I guess, within Israel. And it's not baseless. I mean, there was wars and terrorism and cafes and buses being blown up. They have reason to be afraid of each other. It reminds me a lot of the situation in Ireland that I looked into a little bit over the process of studying this conflict. You had the Catholics and the Protestants, who basically they look exactly the same, but they had this that the Protestants wanted a Protestant majority state, and it was built in the middle of on the corner of a Catholic country, and there was all this hatred amongst from America. They just looked like two groups of white people. What are they yelling to each other about? I don't really get it, And that's kind of what you got here. You have two groups of people that are they dress a little different and they have a little different accent, but actually the cultures are fairly similar. They eat the same food, and Israeli culture was all kind of developed by bringing all these Arab Jews from all these Arab countries that right after it was founded, and they sort of dominated the culture in a way in terms of mannerisms and stuff. What? Right. So I don't know. I agree. There's a lot of fear, and that's really where you need to start, by getting Israelis and Palestinians to talk to each other and meet each other and realize they're both sort of normal. they're caught in sort of a messed up situation, and they need to work together if they're going to get themselves out of it. They can't pull themselves out of it separately, which they think they can. So I totally agree with things, because really Israelis, even the people who are sect and stuff like that, they still think that this is like the homeland of the Jewish people. You know, it even predates Zionism or anything like that. That's just like part of Jewish culture. Like we don't necessarily have to be against the Arabs that live here too. You know, I mean, most people say that they're like, you know, our cousins and stuff. So why can't we all get the family to get along in one little place and find a way to work it out? And I like the idea of like, I first like got into it when I saw a video of Kamal. He was doing some kind of interview and speaking about how, you know, the solution is to share the whole land and still find a way for Israelis to feel like they're getting some kind of representation and protection, and for the same thing for Palestinians, really. So they have that security blanket to hold on to of some kind of state, but then sort of rights extended throughout the territory. So like I could still, as a Jewish person or as an Israeli, live West Bank if I wanted to, and someone from the West Bank, it feels like this is all Palestine. Like, what are you kidding me? Why can't I go to Jaffa? So you should be able to go to Jaffa, and should just be able to like find a way to make it work here, and we could all get along, you know?
Right.
I really think if the system was somehow normalized, like people.
Yeah.
So I don't know. You have another question?
Yeah. Well, Kamal, I know Greta asked you a question below, and I mean she watches some of these videos pretty often. So if you want to respond to any of her questions that she asked you below, would you mind doing that? I think Rafi, she asked.
Yeah, I saw it too late. I didn't see it in time. I mean, she said, "Isn't it against international law to separate families?" You know, I guess it is, but you know, and then she asked, "Are you allowed to live anywhere in Israel with your wife?" The answer is no. Why should the Palestinians accept a state that is built on their land? Rafi, why should the Palestinians accept a state that is built on their land? Well, all right, that's for Rafi. Okay. I understand everything Greta is saying, and these are the same arguments that people on the Palestinian side have been making. But at the end of the day, I just don't think you can, and you can continue making these arguments, and I think they're legitimate, but I don't think they will reach, you know, who are you asking these questions to? You know, you're not going to convince the Israelis of international law. They don't recognize it for the most part. They don't care. They think the UN is biased towards Israel. So I just don't think the solution lies from this line of questioning. I mean, the question now to me is if we're going to have a shared future, if we're going to have a union, if we're going to have this vision, for example, of being one country, how do you do it without and be acceptable to the other side? Now, I know as a Palestinian, for Palestinians to accept something like this, they would want equality. They've, you know, for 60 years they've lived in a state like Israel where they felt there's no equality, either in the West Bank and Gaza or Palestinians in Israel itself. They didn't feel they had equality, and they want that to change. And Israel, you know, wants this idea of this Jewish state, wants this idea, like, since the Holocaust, that they can feel secure. And so, you know, so to me, we'll say, okay, let's start with these two states. The first question is, what would be the borders of these two states? You know, to me, that's easy. We can either keep it de facto, the 1967 borders, exactly as they are, and in my vision, borders don't become as relevant as they are today, because today the reason borders are very significant is because you're talking about a permanent split. But when you're talking about a country with almost invisible lines, the borders don't become as significant. Like, for example, how many people really know the borders between New York and New Jersey? The borders don't matter as much because someone from New Jersey can live in New York and vice versa. So, but having said that, I recognize how important it is for Israel to have a Jewish majority in their state. So I would tell, the first question I would tell Israel is that you would have a choice. We could either keep the borders, you know, based on 1967, because I don't think the Palestinians would accept anything less, or if you want a super majority Jewish, we can go along the border of the West Bank and see those Israeli cities that are Palestinian, and we could, in theory, include them in the Palestinian state. This way you increase the Jewish majority in the remaining state. Now, to me, that doesn't matter, but this, I would offer this, I would put this on the line for the benefit of Israelis if they want it. Now, having created the border of a state, I would move on. Now, obviously, Israel, one of the fears it has, how can we protect ourselves if one day those Palestinians decide to march against us or something? Well, I would tell the Israelis, you can take your entire Israeli military and make it your state national guard. I mean, I'm just giving you examples of things that the both can agree on. You can make the entire Israeli military your state national guard, so it doesn't have to be based on trust. It doesn't have to be based on that. And then, one fear of Israel, well, what if we have millions of people trying to move to Israel? This would upset the demographic balance. This could cause a disaster. All this we can have rules for. So, for example, for the federation or confederation, as Rafi likes to call it, we can say all Jews and all Palestinians around the world can move to this country. Well, we can create rules. We can say, for example, Jews can initially move to Israel proper. Palestinians can initially move to Palestine, which is the West Bank and Gaza. And, for example, each will have to live in those respective states for 5 years before they can move to the other side. So my point here is the details are not going to be worked out between me and Rafi. But we can create all kind of rules to alleviate the fears. My main thing is to keep the basis of the country is to be the free movement of labor and people. Because if you have free movement of labor and people have been able to travel easily to work, to visit with no problems. First of all, there's less of a desire to live in the other side if it takes you 2 minutes to go there. And whereas now the Palestinians are all trying to want to live in East Jerusalem because the West Bank is closed off. So if they lived in East Jerusalem, even though they don't have citizenship, they have free movement of labor and people. It's easier to work. It's easier to live, and then then it becomes a question of how do you have a government? I've always suggested for the federal government, each state can contribute 50% to it. So again, these are just examples of what we can do, and
Right.
and the details can be worked out if they talk about it. But if they continue talking about separating, and I really don't think the Israelis want to separate, so it's a farce. I honestly don't think the Palestinians want to separate. The only reason they ask for it is because they feel their situation is intolerable. So we're in we're pursuing a solution, the two-state that no one wants, and that ultimately will not work. So let's work together on a shared future and create the details that make it work and live together. I mean, look at East Jerusalem. Look at East Jerusalem. I'm always fascinated. I mean, the old city of Jerusalem. I'm always fascinated, but when I see these Jews and the Orthodox Jews walking in the Arab neighborhoods and vice versa, I'm always fascinated by that. And I'm saying, if it works in this little microcosm, even though it's not perfect, why can't it work in the whole country?
Right.
Why can't we live together like that?
Right. So just quick thing I'm going to throw out there to you. One, I think Mahmoud asked a question regarding the refugees in Jordan, Lebanon, and Syria. What would be your solution for that? The other thing that I was going to ask, you both to maybe talk about, do you think there's the right representation on both the Palestinian and the Israeli side to broker these sorts of solutions and peace agreements? And just as a quick note, unfortunately, shortly I have to leave because I have someone coming on to discuss Egypt in about 15-20 minutes. So I'd love to have you guys continue the conversation. There's a bunch of people watching the conversation, so they can submit you guys questions, and you can continue. But I'm just going to have to leave in like 10, 15 minutes to get that Egyptian conversation started. So is that okay with you if you guys speak for a little while longer?
That works for me.
That's fine.
All right, great. So do you want to address Mahmoud's question about the refugees? Maybe Rafi, you want to take it, how you would approach the refugees, and then Kamal can bounce his ideas off of you. And then I'd love to hear you guys talk about the representation right now of both peoples, and if this is really even possible with who's...
Sure.
Yeah, go ahead.
My thoughts on refugees, I looked at some studies that were done by the Palestinian Authority a few years ago in 2004, and they asked refugees from the Palestinian territories, Lebanon, Syria, and Jordan, and they asked these people, like, if Israel agreed to let a limited number of Palestinian refugees, but didn't specify what number that would be, how many of you would want to go to Israel? Would you want to go to the Palestinian territories, and maybe get a better house than where you're living if you're living in a refugee? And if you're out of the country, would you want to come to either the Palestinian state or the state of Israel? And out of the total number of people, it was about 10% of people said they would actually want to literally come to the state of Israel. Majority would go to the state of Palestine because a lot of them would think they feel more comfortable in an Arab majority state. So I think if you made the borders of the state of Palestine include some empty spaces that are now of Israel, you could then build homes for more Palestinians that were interested in living in the Palestinian state. All the refugees and give compensation, and only have maybe another 500,000 Palestinians on the Israeli side. And within the Palestinian territories now, within the West Bank in particular, there's about 550,000 Israelis that are living there. So they've got about 500,000 guys they want to put on our side. We got 500,000 guys we'd like to leave on their side. I think we can make a fair trade. And Israel still ends up, it drops from a 70 or an 80% majority of Jews to a 75% majority of Jews. And if we could get everyone into sort of a comfortable situation where most people were resettled, and it could have flexibility. People could also get a green card to live in Israel if they wanted to live there temporarily or even permanently, and they could be flexible about the numbers. But still, you could have those Palestinians that would want to come back and settle them in the state of Israel, and you'd still have a solid majority of Jews within the state of Israel, and you'd end up with a Palestinian state that had maybe 10% Jews. That's the bottom line. They could make two states if they could handle that. Israel becomes a little bit more Arab, and the Palestinian state absorbs a little bit of. And once then they were in a comfortable situation, you made Jerusalem like a shared capital. Then you could start building a relationship between these states pretty comfortably, I think, and let people move from one state to another and have flexibility. And over time, the rules initial agreement that involved resettling a specific number of refugees and compensation and a full package on the refugees, and also where the Palestinian state would agree that after the borders were drawn, any Israelis left on their side would be able to be citizens of the state of Palestine and have rights there. And then you'd have a situation where both sides have a bunch of their citizens in the other state anyways. So by nature of the situation, they need to have some kind of cooperative relationship. It doesn't make sense. They're going to be friendly states, and depending on what level of friendliness, does it become NAFTA? Does it become like the European Union? Does it become like Switzerland?